All right, you want to?
Yeah, whenever you're ready. Sure.
All right, I think we can get started, and anybody else that can join us in progress that comes. So I'm Bill Harder. I work for CTRL. I'm our qualitative and survey research methodologist there. I also teach in SPA and in SIS. In fact, in SIS, I teach a skills institute on social media analysis and how we can incorporate that into research. So it's really a research methods class on that. I'll let Jason introduce himself.
I'm Jason Mollica. I'm a professor in the School of Communication here at AU. I've been here since 2015, and we launched our digital analytics communication and certification class in the fall of 2017, and since then we've now been teaching it to graduates and undergraduates, and will also be taught online starting mid-October this year. So we've seen the importance of how our students needing, and we've actually had surveys done when students were leaving the university, especially our program, and asking what they needed the most. And it turned out they wanted more training and understanding of digital and social media analytics. So we added this class, and since then we've been able to help students and graduate and undergraduate understand the how and why between posting on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and what's posted on digital websites.
So we're talking about teaching with social media today, but also thinking about social media analytics. So let me just do a quick roadmap of what we want to hit. But again, I think this should be useful for the people in the room. So feel free to jump in with questions or observations as we go through. First thing, let's talk about how we bring social media into the class as a sort of pedagogical tool, right? And think about how we can build and further discussions with our students, how we can bring in other voices that might not necessarily be there. But we'll just think about this as a learning tool. And look at some types of activities that we might have in class involving using social media data. So that's the other side of this. Not necessarily having the students engage as a way to have discussions, but social media as a data source that we can sort of plumb and scrape from to get things related to topics we might be talking about in another class, a way to bring in some real contemporary current data. Then we'll take a look at some tools that we might use to collect that social media data or broader analytics about a trending topic on social media. Then at the end, we'll leave some time for discussion, questions. We can brainstorm out how you might use some of these approaches in your own classes, some things like that. So I would be remiss if we didn't start with a privacy conversation. And so I just want to spend a couple minutes quickly talking about FERPA and social media. And this is the part of the caveat where I say I am not a rep of counsel's office, and this is purely in my background as a professor here, as somebody that works with social media and has done some research on this. Some things to think about related to FERPA and privacy issues. If you are going to use Twitter or another social media platform in your class, sort of the lead here is that it doesn't have to interfere with FERPA, but depending on how you employ it, there are scenarios in which student privacy could be infringed upon. So just some things to sort of critically think about before you start to engage or require students to tweet or somehow be involved in a public-facing social media tool for your class. First, I think you should think about what the requirements are, right? Is this just another avenue for conversation for your students, or are they required to be posting in a class, right? Are you requiring a certain amount of tweets on a topic or something like that to engage in a discussion or share a certain number of articles? Right? As soon as we move towards that required component, then that starts to have us suggest that there'll be an assessment, right? That there'll be a graded component of it. And when we start to have graded work, that's where FERPA really comes in, right? We'd also encourage you to think about the ways that you might be using social media. Think about the types of things that students would likely be to disclose given those contexts, and just game that out in your head a little bit, right? Because FERPA covers a lot of different types of data, but additionally, things that FERPA covers are things like enrollments in classes and schedules in a lot of ways. And so think for a moment about requiring that a student post either using your course hashtag or something like that, maybe also publicly disclosing things like their course schedule that are searchable and things like that. And given, we've had issues here where students, privacy concerns related to stalking, privacy concerns related to any number of other things, and we should just be aware that this could involve a disclosure of any other dimensions of their life here at AU. And so often that's why we want to maybe move away from a requirement because it lets students opt out without disclosing to other students in the course that they have these other sort of privacy concerns. This is another part, how your replies to students will be construed. FERPA also enters when we have graded components and what that grade is, even if it is not posting you out an A on this. But when we start to offer feedback on these things, that could be construed as now this is information that the university owns because a professor is offering an evaluation of it. So I think we should think critically about, in the dialogue between our students and ourselves on social media, how is that construed in terms of replies and in terms of an assessment? And finally, I think we should think about the life of the content post-class, right? That we're asking our students to post something on a public-facing platform. They can always delete tweets later if they don't want that to be there. But I think the news has been full enough of examples of how those tweets might not always be deleted and can live on after our times. So these aren't things to dissuade you at all from engaging in social media classes, but this is maybe the legally required disclaimers before we go into this a little further. Here's some good links that sort of discuss this in depth. I'll tweet out, because let's be topical, a link to the slides after this so that you can get to those links if you like. But those things put aside, let's think about how we actually might bring this into our classrooms. Because I work at a center for teaching, research, and learning, I'll lead off by saying, whenever we integrate social media into our classes, we should be doing so with an eye towards having a pedagogical value, right? This isn't just to be the hip professor that tweets, but this is to also, we think that our students will gain something from tweeting. We think that this will move towards us helping our students achieve the learning objectives of the course. And so there should be a pedagogical underpinning whenever we are integrating a new tool into a class. One of the easiest ways to sort of start to bring social media into our class is a course hashtag. And so here's a smattering of course hashtags. The first two rows from Jason's courses, the last one, Harder 210, from mine. And at this point, I'm going to kick it over to Jason and let him talk a little bit about how he uses these in his class.
Sure. Well, one of the things I learned from my time in public relations and having done some consulting and actually understanding how students are communicating, first of all, we have to understand where the students are. And while they may all not be on Twitter, the vast majority of the work that we're doing, especially from my classroom and some other classrooms, is on Twitter. So what I decided to end up doing was I took the course number, and it's listed as COM in the when you're signing up for the class, and I took all the course numbers that I had been teaching. I still occasionally use 380 when I teach research. COM 301 is public relations when I teach that. 420 was for the digital communications analytics class. However, in the spring of 19, we combined it with the graduates, so it would be 420 and 620. From that point forward, I decided I'm not going to keep using numbers, especially since we had graduates, undergraduates. I decided that it would be best to use AU Digital Com. What this allows me to do then is, in my syllabus, I put in there that you can use the class hashtag AU Digital Com. You want to share an article that you would like the class to discuss. You would like to share your thoughts on something that connects to what we've been discussing. Or the way I use it is, if I share something that I may have seen that wasn't discussed in class, but pertains to social and digital media, pertains to public relations. One of the other reasons we use AU Digital Com is because we do 2 Twitter chats a semester in my digital class. And the great thing about this is it allows us to take the classroom and move it online, and allow the discussion that we would normally have right in a classroom like this and put it out to the masses. So that's another great reason to have a hashtag, is because it allows you to discuss not just with your students, but with your colleagues and people that you would never think would get involved in the discussion, to get them involved and see what you're doing. So that's one of the main reasons why I created course hashtags. Again, it should fit into what you are going to be doing in your classroom. If you decide to use your name like Bill has, terrific, do that. If you want to use the sort of top, if it's going to be political science, you could use AU Political Science or AU Poli-Sci or AU things along those lines. So that way you're creating something that you continue to use where students will understand it, especially those that may want to take a course or be involved in a program in the future. It also helps going back to look to see what people have discussed the past semester. I always go back and look at that AU Digital Com hashtag and see what are the conversations that we had, and we'll see a little bit of this later on. What are the conversations that we had that we were able to say, I can now use that in the following semester, or I can use that as something for a blog post. Or something that I can then show people in our division to say, hey, we discussed this in class. This may be a good idea for a focus at the next big meeting. All of these things allow us to gather ideas, also do research, but mostly from my perspective, I look at it as a way to take the classroom and move it online. Now, I know that's not some novel idea, but the students find that it really allows them to even participate more. The ones that don't necessarily raise their hand or feel like they can take part in the discussion, I notice a higher discussion at times on Twitter because they feel more comfortable and they can actually talk a little bit more and maybe get their ideas out a little better than they would by raising their hand. So the hashtags really help in those ways as well.
Yeah. So the other thing we can do is let's talk a little bit about how we frame this and the role that we play in these discussions. So I'll be the first to admit that this past summer I just wrapped up teaching my 210 class, which is an online public policy class. Just general introduction to domestic policymaking in the U.S. context. And this is the first time I actually used the course hashtag. I had brought in data normally in my other courses, but I thought, let's try and actually extend this discussion. So I said, I'm not going to be requiring you to tweet, but I'm going to be here, I'm going to be tweeting, I'm going to essentially share recommended reading, additional articles. One thing I thought would be really nice to do is give a more public policy class where we talk about policy analysis. Within SPA, within SIS, right, we have a lot of policy analysis that is coming out. And I think that's something that students often don't understand the other things that professors do, right? This amorphous idea that we do research. This is a nice way to say, well, here's an article citing such and such study, or here's a piece of analysis that came out on this recent topic. And so I use this to push out things that weren't required reading, but things that were sort of secondary or tertiarily related to concepts we're talking about. What I had hoped was that this would be a nice place for then students to share and bring in other examples of newspaper stories where they'd say, well, here's that concept we just talked about. Here's where they're socially constructing a policy design. Or here's how when we talk about immigrants, we talk about them this way. That didn't so much happen, right? And even when I looked at, the weird thing is when I looked at like things like likes and retweets, People were liking and retweeting them. They weren't necessarily my students. I shared an editorial from the Philly Inquirer, right, that was dealing with needle exchanges when we were talking about how we develop policies around that. And the Philly Inquirer was happy about that and picked that up, and that had a great conversation in and around sort of the Philadelphia policy community. But my students weren't necessarily so much sharing it or things like that. But then in conversations that I had with them during office hours, they were bringing up the stories, right? And through no prompting of their own, they were referencing things that I had tweeted. So it's totally anecdotal, but they were aware of these things, right? I was not mentioning these stories outside of Twitter. So it's not like they learned about them somewhere else. But in conversations with me, they would reference them. So there's somewhat of a screaming into the void feeling sometimes, but at least anecdotally, even if they're a little gun-shy about engaging publicly, they for me at least, they were engaging and were aware of the content that was being produced. One other way that I'll say that I've used this is I always have a guest speaker in my class. From the president of the local chapter of SEIU when we talk about labor policy, and the ability to share his Twitter handle, but also SEIU's Twitter handle, right? That's a really quick way for somebody to run through that feed of that union and get a sense of the kind of work that they do. And students are much more likely, I think, to spend 10 minutes running through somebody's Twitter feed than if I send them 5 Washington Post articles and say, why don't you familiarize yourself with the work that this union does, or the Janus decision, right? And hopefully they start to go down different rabbit holes on that Twitter feed, but I think that's a nice way to sort of do background sometimes or familiarize people.
It's also great, and you talk about the guest speaker angle, one of the things that I'll also do is I encourage the students, tweet while you have a guest speaker. And I'll tell the speaker that comes into the classroom, do you mind if students, he's like, absolutely not. No, and most of the people that we have come into our classroom are, PR professionals, communications professionals, et cetera. Even the ones that are Skyping in, I say, if you want to take a picture of the screen, put it up there, it's a great public relations tool, but it's also a great way to make contacts. Mm-hmm. If you end up tweeting a guest speaker or tweeting about something and you tag them in it, great, because then they may go back after the class is over, look to see where they were mentioned and how they were mentioned. They may end up following. Now, that may not be the biggest of biggest deals, but for a student that is looking for a way in potentially as they get closer to graduation, whether it be as an undergrad or graduate student, that little retweet or like or follow request on a social platform could be that small in that they get that helps them get a job or at least an internship or some way to make another connection. You go down the rabbit hole, per se.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. In fact, we got some of your conversation. Mm-hmm. You want to take us through these?
Sure. This is a Twitter chat we did in my Com 420 class to AU Digital Com last spring. It was based on the admissions scandal that was going on with a number of members of Hollywood getting caught up, or I don't say caught up, but basically accused of looking for favors, etc. So we were talking about admissions at universities in general. The top person there was a student of mine that graduated over a year ago, and talked about how that she wished she had a chance to be part of a Twitter chat. The rest go on, and these are all undergrads, but we're in the same class, in talking about in hashtagging, so that I could go back and look to see what they felt about the particular answer to a question that was posed. This student here was part of the class but could not make it because she was not feeling well. I didn't tell her she couldn't participate because the great thing about a Twitter chat is you can be anywhere. So that student was still able to participate and talk about this. I only bring this up not because I'm trying to humble brag, but our Twitter chat in April trended nationwide, worldwide, and the United States. The reason why I highlight that is not because you can pick a hashtag and say, "Oh, great, you can trend." It comes back to that if you have meaningful conversation, if you focus the talk and the conversation on what the class is about or a particular topic, you can end up using this for data down the road. Like I said earlier, I take everything that we do in our chats. I'm not mining it for private information. I'm looking at things that I may be able to use for discussion points in other semesters, other classes. In this case, in this Twitter chat, I can use this as a highlight to how we can do a successful Twitter chat in any classroom. So that's the reason why I bring that up, is because while it may not have looked during the chat while we had a lot of people in there, the conversation generated enough excitement, retweets from people, or conversations for people, not just alums, but other professionals that jumped in, that saw the hashtag, may have known me, but then maybe stumbled upon it and said, oh, I want to jump in as well. Getting a discussion going around the classroom not only brings us something of a, great feel-good factor, it also brings us back to why we can look at this data eventually and say, you know what, there's a reason why we started this. There's a reason why I have the use of social media in my classroom. We're not using it for something to complain. We're not just tweeting anything out or posting anything for the sake of posting. It comes back to these are things we can actually use for learning profiles. We can also use it for future assignments, but I can also give this to my division director and say, look, if you want to end up using this as an example in your other classes, or any of my colleagues want to do this, go ahead and do it, because it has shown that we can develop a profile in just one class with a hashtag in building not only community, but then also building future research, in my opinion.
And I'll make a point on that research component. Because my office, the CTRL, has a push lately that we've launched in the past year to be producing more SOTL research on the science of teaching and learning. This is a really nice sort of data source for that, right? And because we always have to think about the IRB and approval of sort of human subjects data, this is data that is produced as a byproduct of normal class exercises. This would be produced anyway. And so the IRB would give you an exemption to use this type of data if you were going to go on and do research and write about this. You still have to go to the IRB, let them give you the exemption. But this is not necessarily something that will be onerous to use as part of human subjects research. This is a byproduct of a class. We're already producing this data.
It's also a way to get, and I mentioned earlier about the discussion of someone in a class that may not have necessarily felt comfortable raising their hand, or may not have felt that great about saying, hey, I want to say something, but I can't really say it in a classroom forum, not because she didn't want to, but because she just felt more comfortable doing it this way. This is from this happens to be the online social media tactics and strategies class I taught in the first summer session. I had this student on campus as well, and what I loved about this is that she not only used the hashtag, but this whole thread is something that I'm going to take and use this semester. Because I want the students to know that while participation in class, you need to participate. If you take to Twitter and decide, you know what, I want to let you know that I was paying attention, like you had said earlier, take it offline. They may not have responded on Twitter, but when you met with them in office hours, it was, wow, they brought it up. In this case, we're now bringing it, she didn't feel comfortable saying it on the discussion forum on Blackboard, but she took it to Twitter to say, what will the future look like as social reality becomes even more dependent on digital networking? And I won't read every tweet, but what I loved here is she went on a whole thread and had no problem doing it. She felt totally comfortable and came to the conclusion, digital networking is only going to evolve from here. It's up to what you wish to make of it. Thanks for reading. And you know what? And I messaged her and I said, this was outstanding. Because even though I may not have seen this in a discussion post that she was graded for, I'm looking at this and saying, I would want this. That means she understood the material that we've been discussing for that week or prior to that week and what's going to be coming up. Plus, she understood how to use the platform of Twitter to get a discussion thread going. No one else may not many people, obviously, it says liked it or anything, but I told her it didn't matter to me how many people liked it or retweeted it or responded. It mattered to me that she felt comfortable enough to go on a social network and talk about what she felt was the future. And especially when we are trying to get students to feel more and more engaged, no matter what race, creed, gender identity, if they feel most comfortable going online to do it, I want to make sure that they feel that, and I will continue to tell them, go for it.
Yeah, from a pedagogical point of view, right? We spend a lot of time when we talk about building inclusive classrooms, talking about UDL, Universal Design for Learning. And this is a prime example, right, of providing a different way for a student to engage with the content.
So one of the questions that comes to my mind are what are the implications for your teaching practice? And so, of course, the learning part is terrific, and I love that you said that. So when I think of what you're both putting out here, how has that changed and transformed your teaching practice?
Well, I'd love to hear what you have to say, but I think at its core, we have to rethink what participation means. Right? And I think we have to go back and rethink what participation looks like and how we talk about that in our syllabus.
I know I'm going to, Teresa has inside dirt on me because we're wrapping up developing the digital analytics course for our online program in SOC. But we've talked about this a number of times about how do we do it on a rubric? How do we clarify what participation? Can I give a half a point for something? So when I see something like this, I don't normally see things like this. And it doesn't mean it's a knock on the way a course is set up or how it's taught. It comes down to where can we meet our students at that present time. And right now, while she may not have posted this on Blackboard, I may have gotten, any of you that teach online or even have discussion boards as part of your classrooms, you may get great post, I agree, blah, blah, blah. You know, I get bored out of my mind by that. This is what I want. And if I know granted the discussion board post is still important, but if I see something like this as part of my class, I know they get it.
I'm just curious, why would a student you offer discussion forums as well as this? Why do some students choose one versus the other? What would be the benefits?
Well, what I end up doing is because the discussion, especially in the online program, the discussion forum is part of the grade. I told students at the beginning of this summer session that I'm using this hashtag. If you want to add anything else or things that you feel would be not that they wouldn't want to discuss in a board, feel free to move it to Twitter and let's discuss it further because you're going to get a bigger audience to discuss, especially as a communication student in this way. And again, I'm only using PR, marketing, communications in this example. You can discuss a lot of things. If you have poli-sci, you can end up discussing obviously you can discuss politics. You're doing any sort of, even from your perspective, Bill, you said you may not necessarily get everyone discussing it, but if that means that someone discusses this online, and then you can then bring it into the classroom or in a discussion post, you're really but you're really sort of narrowing the student to say, where you feel most comfortable, we need you to post in the discussion room, but if this means this is bringing out your best, and you then feel more comfortable posting in a discussion board, you still need to do, importance is the discussion board post. But I like to bring it online to see if I can get a little bit more out of the students because I know they're pretty excited about posting on social and digital networks these days. I haven't stretched it into Instagram, Snapchat. I keep it to this because if I start doing the other ones, then I don't want to kind of get into the legality side of things. But I'll also say this. Many of my colleagues use Facebook groups as a place to discuss. They have the classroom discussion on there. That's without using the Blackboard discussion because I think in Blackboard it can get a little, well, no offense, gets a little clunky. Right. We use Engage a lot, obviously, for online, and I've used another platform previously as well as for a trial. But the Facebook groups, because there are so many of the students that have had them for years, they'll use Facebook groups. I want to step back just real quickly and say, you talked something earlier about not forcing students to get on, but one of the things I automatically ask my students at the beginning of the semester is, and I have Twitter discussion, I said you need to create one, but I have the caveat that says if you have a serious issue with using Twitter, you absolutely have an aversion to it, you don't want to, I respect it. I'm not going to force any student to be on a social network that they don't want to be on. That being said, I'll ask that about Facebook. at the beginning of the semester said, if we have any discussions that regard to class, would you rather Facebook, Twitter, or the discussion on Blackboard? Across the board, it's always been Twitter. The reason being is that students they go on Facebook, but I think they view it as, I think as we've gotten older, we're going back to it, like the 25, 26, we get there. So, sorry for the long answer, but basically what I've come to here is, especially looking at this over the years, is I found Twitter to be the place to get a little bit more out of students. The discussion may start online in Blackboard or Engage, but then taking it online brings another component to it. And I actually do, when I'm grading, I look at the discussion on Blackboard or on Engage, but then I also look at this a little bit as well and say, they may not have posted as well on the discussion, and if they've then gone to Twitter to do something, I may reach out to them and say, look, your discussion on Blackboard wasn't that what I needed to see more. I went on Twitter and saw what you posted. You should have done that in the discussion post as well. But I'm willing to stretch a little bit because I know this is where a lot of students feel comfortable. Young people feel comfortable nowadays.
I think that zeroes back to inclusive syllabus. That's a big topic on campus, by the way, and most of us know this. And that I like how this is opening and expanding, because when I think of learning, I think of extension of learning outside the classroom. This is just beautiful. I mean, how it organically grows.
Yeah. I mean, and I think the other part of this that we should remember that, I mean, you all have taught enough classes to know that cohort effects are a real thing, and it's a crapshoot who the 30 students that you get at any moment are. And I think that the same way that in-class discussions will vary from section to section, so will things like engagement with social media. And so that it's an iterative game, and it will be a couple sections, I think, that involves that learning, just like we all learned as faculty about how to run in-class discussions as well, right? And so if this is a thing that I think appeals to you, I think it's a thing that we should commit to learning through a couple sections and a couple iterations of our own courses.
Comfort level, too.
Yeah.
I mean, I would never tell a professor, adjunct or otherwise, saying, you've got to use this in the classroom. Well, if you don't feel comfortable using it, you're going to end up logging in and then not really getting the overall idea of what Twitter is all about. So why force the issue? It just happened to be when Twitter hit the mainstream, I felt like I was part of the public relations and digital communications field enough that I've been doing Twitter chats for such a long time. Bringing it into the classroom was not something that was foreign. I felt comfortable.
I think that's a really good point. Like, both Jason and I are people that use Twitter in our regular lives anyway, and so I think that there is a bit of, if you're going to use it in your class, your students should also see that you are using it as a choice in your professional life. And not to say that there can't also be personal things. You're going to see a lot of soccer if you're on my Twitter. But like that, it should be something that you are engaging with, and that will, I think, also help you as an instructor, and you start to think about ways to engage with this.
Yeah, I mean, it should feel natural. I mean, it's sort of that feeling of, when you grade a paper or you're looking at a submission, something you look at and then say, someone's forcing it. They're just trying to stick to the exact points that you're looking to grade. You don't want that to be the same on Twitter or any social platform. Make it, at the best, it doesn't happen overnight. The old days, it was with Twitter or any social network, and I say this to my classes all the time, professionals as well. In the old days, it was just jump in and get a feel of the water like it's the pool and everything. Well, now, you can't just jump in because it's like jumping into the piranha-infested waters. So what I always recommend now is create an account if you want, then lurk for a little bit. But don't feel like you're forced to post. When you feel like you have something to say, it's about soccer, post it. I post a lot about the Mets, and believe me, it's gone up and down all year. But I like doing it because it's the other side of the coin. I can post all I want about PR. I can post articles, podcasts, tweets, whatever. I like to have a balance. And I think the more students see there is a human side of us, on what we're doing. Sure, they don't want to feel like you're being hip all the time, but I'm also not going to go out and say, I'm not going to go and show myself at a concert going all crazy. What I am going to show is I may show a GIF file of a home run, or hey, someone posted something great, and I'll do Captain America doing the salute. Something like that. It's fun. I'm not trying to force it. Make sure that if you're going to use this in the classroom, you feel comfortable. Because if you don't do it. It's okay. It's not. I'm not going to look at this. Well, that professor decided not to use Twitter. Forget it. I'm not. It's like with anything in our classrooms. We have to feel like we know what we're doing. We have to feel like we're comfortable with it. It's just like when you've come into my classrooms to talk about Qualtrics. When the students may feel like, oh my gosh, I don't know. By the time you're finished, and then a week later, you would think they had 10 years experience in it, and that's where the comfort level comes in.
It's another dimension, I think, of being your authentic self while you're teaching, right? I think we have one more Twitter thread.
This is just the same thing about showing the different, like showing graduates and undergraduates in the class. This was that Twitter chat I had mentioned about the college admission stuff, but just basically showing how the conversation went. These students were all in the same classroom at the same time. Some of them were sitting, one was here, another was over here, but they weren't saying it out loud. They may have been laughing about a GIF or a meme that was put out during the chat, but many of the students would say, hey, I found this, you have to show this, or, this student showed this post here. I had a student replying to another student. She was sitting 2 seats down from her. The reason why I mentioned that is you can have a great discussion in class and there's no talking going on. It's all going on here. But then after we're finished with that discussion, I'll always stop. We usually do it right up till about a half hour before the end. So we'll do 2:30 to 3:30. We did it last semester. So I take the last half hour and debrief. So what did you guys think? How did you feel? What could we have done better? What could we do? What did you think we did really well? Things like that. And they may have more information, and most times we'll see after a Twitter chat on a topic, they'll found something else saying, hey, wanted to share this. This is based on our Twitter chat earlier today. That also, again, is bringing the sort of, you've learned what we're talking about in the classroom during that time. Now they're taking that sort of knowledge of, I got to be keeping an eye on what's going on, what we discussed, and sharing it not just with the class, but with also my other followers as well.
And I think part of this, that you were making the point earlier that this AU Digital Com hashtag has existed for a while. And I think you were showing me before that in this conversation, right, you've got alumni that then have taken the class years ago that are just see this conversation that's happening and jump into it. So now you have your students interacting with alumni from this program. You've got colleagues that just know you from Twitter for something else, seeing this discussion going on and jumping in. And this idea of just expanding sort of the population of who your students are interacting with is a really kind of cool feature of this, particularly if you have this sort of hashtag that's going to live for a while.
Yeah, and it's also a way you think about it too. We're in a bigger perspective. I'm also trying to promote SOC, but also the university. And in my Twitter bio, I have that I'm a professor at AU SOC. I have many of the other things that I'm doing as far as outside of the university, but I'm trying to bring a small part of it. One of the bigger parts of it is for the students to get more comfortable and see the conversations they can have. But I'm also thinking of it from a marketing and PR perspective. If I can show that a smart conversation is going on, I'm trying to tie it into maybe something that's newsworthy, and maybe one of the local news stations pick it up and see, oh wow, college students maybe they want to come in and talk to them. We had a podcast come in, a local DC podcast, the Flack Pack came in and did their podcast from our class last semester, and we talked about the future of public relations, but what the students felt was their future. Whole podcast recorded in the classroom. We were tweeting about it. Then it was also a highlight for the students. So it's sort of like a back scratcher in a way too. And I like the publicity side of things, but I also like the learning objectives to it as well.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways that something as simple as that dedicated hashtag in these conversations can go for us. Let's shift gears a little bit, just in the interest of time, and then we can come back and have a larger conversation at the end. if we want to use this as not necessarily a conversation the tool for our students, but as a way to generate some data, a really easy way to get some really current data to look at an event that's going on in the world today. I think we're just going to highlight 3 different avenues that you can use for that at varying levels of difficulty and access. Probably your easiest entry point, I'm going to guess, is in vivo, which I am our resident in vivo expert for the university, so I'm more than happy to chat about that with you at some point. But in vivo is a qualitative and mixed methods analysis platform. The way that we have negotiated the contract, we have a site license for the university. We can install it on literally any computer of a faculty, student, or staff member. This includes personal laptops. So if you are using it in a class, we can install it on all of your students' computers. I'll point out Aaron Bozacker because he's in the room. He teaches a discourse analysis class, right, and that I work with extensively. Every spring semester, we've got about 60 students that are engaged with and using in vivo in an SIS undergraduate class, not to mention the other courses. The reason I'm bringing it up here is there is a browser plugin for in vivo that is installed alongside in vivo in Chrome. You press that button and it exports tweets into a usable data format. We'll talk in a moment about what exactly you get and how many tweets you can export. The next level up, maybe in terms of complexity, a little bit of a steeper learning curve is R and RStudio. R is an open language or an open source programming language. It exists in this sort of world of R, Python. You might have heard of these things. But there are a number of packages within R tweet, and that should have had a twit R, because R loves a pun, are 2 ways that will actually export tweets out and analyze tweets. There are other web scraping packages of various quality. There are things written to scrape Reddit, to scrape Instagram, things like that. Those are a little more finicky and probably require at least somewhat of a coding background. So I would not necessarily recommend sort of using them live in class the way I might use in vivo. But if there's something, maybe some sort of subreddit thread that you said, if we could pull this out, this directly relates to the topic that I'm teaching, this would be a great sort of raw data for my students to use as group projects in class. That's a perfect thing to come meet with me, and we'll figure out a way to get you that data. Other thing, we're going to let Jason talk about meltwater a little bit because he uses that in his class. But the thing I will point out that on October 24th, 2:30 to 4, down in Anderson B11, I'm going to teach a real hands-on workshop on social media analysis with in vivo and R. It's in a computer lab. We're going to run through both of those things. So if you go on CTRL's website, you'll see our list of research software workshops. But that's a specific one that I'm going to do that will be hands-on, everything we're about to talk about and show you.
Can students take that?
Yeah, that's open to anyone at university. Students, faculty, staff. I'm sorry?
Will you stream?
I won't necessarily stream it because it's not set up there. But the other thing I do at this university is guest lecture a lot. So if this is something that relates to your class that you're teaching, I'm more than happy to set up a time to come in, talk about it with your students, talk about it specifically in the context of your class. I go to Jason's, I talk about survey design and Qualtrics. I go to half the people in this room's class, so you all know that. So if you can't make that, set up an appointment with me and we can talk about this. So just real quick to think about the types of data we can pull out of Twitter. These are sort of the free and limited data sets that we can get here. Historical Twitter data is very difficult to get access to, particularly the free versions. But what we can get, and this is the same for if you're using in vivo or R, is we can do 2 types of exports. We can do user timeline exports. So we might want to look at the particular tweets of an individual user. From that, we can start from the most recent tweet and work back in time, exporting tweets until we hit a data limit that's defined by Twitter. We don't have control over this. Twitter sets these limits. But the other day, I pulled the tweets from Donald Trump's personal account, not the POTUS account. that limit got me, a little over 4,500 tweets, and that spans an 18-month period. So considering how much he tweets, that's a decent time frame, right? But it's based on volume. So if you get somebody that doesn't tweet as much, you could go back years in their Twitter history.
And it didn't burn the computer?
No. I mean, the content maybe.
Oh, yeah.
The other thing that we can search by, we might want to pull a hashtag or a search term and get, instead of just centered around one individual, get many people talking about a similar topic. So we can export tweets based off a hashtag. This gives us a sample of tweets published in the last 7 to 10 days with that hashtag. So there's two parts. One is a sample of tweets. It's just the nature of social media research. We often have to talk in terms of snapshot or a sample. Social media data is ephemeral, and it's difficult to ever say we have an entire sort of population of tweets from a given period. Think about it as an ethnographic snapshot that we're taking. Second, the last 7 to 10 days. Because the fire hose of Twitter, it is very difficult to get data out of Twitter from longer ago than that. This means if there's something that's happening that you think you want to analyze, pull it while it's happening or within a week of it occurring. People came to me and wanted to look at the start of the Me Too movement on Twitter, right? And billions of tweets ago at this point. We actually cannot extract that. But here's an example. I'm working with somebody on Kogod that we're looking at sort of racial basis of things when it comes to sexual assault. And so two obvious cases here are Epstein and R. Kelly. If we search on them, this is prior to Epstein's death, hashtag Epstein pulled out 15,888 tweets. For R. Kelly, we got 15,371 tweets. Those are pretty sizable networks. And so that's just a lot of raw data that we can play with and we can sort of work through with this.
Bill?
Yeah.
I know that you're doing a whole workshop on this.
Yeah.
Is there a 60-second version of what you can tell us that, like, what N Vivo or R would do with 15,000 tweets?
I'm going to stand. Those are the next slides. We're going there. Yep.
Terrific.
No, I'm glad you asked. Well, actually, let's go to meltwater first.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll keep this quick because I want to get to the in vivo stuff because that's just as important. It's very important, actually. Meltwater is, if you're not familiar with meltwater but may have heard of Brainwatch, there's a bunch of others out there as well. Basically, it's a platform that allows you to look at the deeper analytics of Twitter from a perspective of share voice, sentiment, media analysis, where tweets are coming from, heat maps, etc. It's a very easy platform to use. This is what we certify our students in my classroom for digital analytics. Meltwater allows me to look at tweets from a perspective of how many, for example, if I'm looking up Jeffrey Epstein, regardless of what it is, whether it's connection to President Trump, suicide, the other horrible things that he had done, I just did a search of Jeffrey Epstein here to show sentiment and share a voice. Now, without getting too deep and really making your heads explode, when I look at Meltwater, one of the things that you may have heard in the news of was, the Twitter sentiment or the social media sentiment for Jeffrey Epstein was negative, or he had to share a voice on Twitter, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's wonderful, but from a perspective of how I look at things, I want my students and people to look deeper. Those negative tweets about Jeffrey Epstein, I think we can figure out what that's all about. But why the heck do we have any positive tweets about Jeffrey Epstein? Really? There are people that are talking positive? Well, not so much. That's why I have the students in the classroom and throughout the semester looking deeper at these numbers. While this is the share of voice for what was discussed about Jeffrey Epstein on Twitter, this was in the traditional news. However, what this doesn't tell you is that on this green section here, this is pulling social media data that's also sharing information from digital news sites. This will be tweets from NBC News or CNN or the Philadelphia Inquirer. So I want to figure out from this with sentiment and see why people are talking about it. What are they really saying? And the last point is when you look at negative and think that there are 38,000 tweets that say negative, that could just be saying that he died. Sure, that's going to be negative. But if we take it to something that says plane crash ruled an accident, Well, that, sure, it's a negative, but it could move into neutral. The reason I say that is because the students and we as researchers and communicators in many ways, no matter what profession you're in, have to look at this information to figure out how does it fit ethically. How can you move the data ethically? I'm not saying to change a negative to positive, saying, no, everyone's talking positive about Jeffrey Epstein. No. It's looking at the tweets and saying, is it really negative? Because it's not, then we need to make sure we push it into a neutral category. And that's how then we're making the best educated estimate as to what really the sentiment is about something. So that's what one of the things Meltwater does. It's a really great platform, especially for brands, students to learn about, and frankly, from a perspective of making our students more marketable, whether it's in SOC or any of the schools on campus. It gives them a leg up. If they have an NVivo knowledge or they have Meltwater certification on their resume's LinkedIn profile, it does help. I can tell you right off the bat, I've had a number of students get jobs after they graduated, not just because they had this, but they had it as part of their resume and they had the certification and they knew how to use it. I've had 2 students in the last 4 days actually mail me and say, because of this class, because that you taught us how to do this, it's given me a little bit more of a leg up with my colleagues, and they come to me with information.
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo that. Not necessarily the Meltwater stuff, but the NVivo and the R. I mean, I've had students, go entry level in think tanks and have had really good, feedback that it was those things on their resumes that sent signals that got them the interview or the job.
All of this is invaluable. And NVivo, Meltwater, anything we can bring into a classroom that helps our students make sure that they're better than somebody graduated from GW or whatever. I mean, from my perspective, and I know yours as well, it's about giving our students the best opportunity possible, and from our perspectives as well, making us more marketable, also making us more valuable to the university.
Yeah, I think these are real skill-building tools that we can give our students. So here's just something, this is actually my own research, that gives you an idea of something that R would produce. This is some network analysis. One of the things I study is gubernatorial Twitter networks, and I'm interested in who else shows up in them. So this is actually a network where each dot here or node is a governor or another Twitter account that appears in at least 10 governors' networks. The contrast isn't great here, but the green lines are mentions, and the blue lines are retweets. And so when we think about Twitter data, we think about that in sort of 2 dimensions. One is this type of relational data, where you can actually structure the network and start to think about how information flows through a network. Who talks to who? Who's a gatekeeper? Who passes this on? And we can measure this all in different sort of network-based ways. Then this other part of this is I just separated out the retweets on the top into a network and the mentions on the bottom into a network. And then now we've got these nodes, and they're scaled according to size. So bigger dots here are appearing in more gubernatorial networks. And where they're color-coded according to what type of actor they are. So the purple in here are individual businesses or corporations. Blues are federal agencies. Reds are individuals. The only individual that shows up in more than 10 governors' networks is Franklin Graham, oddly enough. Or maybe not oddly enough. Greens, interest groups, and you get the idea. But we can start to think relationally about how these networks are structured and how information flows through them. This is this is something that we can build out. This is some of the stuff that we get out of NVivo. And I want to point out right now that all of this comes sort of standard generated. This isn't a lot of coding that I had to do. The R stuff, that's some significant coding. You got to learn R to do that. But this is what I did. These are those 15,000 tweets about Jeffrey Epstein. So I want to show us a couple things. We might want to look at what other hashtags are they using within those tweets. And so that's what this bar graph across the top is. Obviously we get hashtag Epstein and hashtag breaking, as in breaking news, far and away, so I cut those bars off. But once we go down that, we can start to see hashtag resist, QAnon, I stand with Ilhan, Pizzagate, if you remember, so right, I'm having a discussion in class about this. And we start to look at this, and we might start to say, okay, we can eliminate a lot of these because they're versions of hashtag Jeffrey Epstein, right? But then we might start to talk about, maybe we use this as a way to talk about the extension of conspiracy theories like QAnon and Pizzagate. So we can identify QAnon, Pizzagate, Stay Woke. If you start to pull these apart, WWG1WGA is a slogan that exists in this conspiracy theory, right? And we can start to look at these. Then we can start to look at which of these occur together. And that's actually what we have across the bottom here. These are different ways to look and to plot sort of how these cluster together. This is in 2 dimensions, and we can start to see sort of what appears near each other as far as gets put in the same hashtag. We can start to plot these in 3 dimensions, because everybody likes those and they look cool, but nobody knows how to read them. But actually this is just a close-up of a dendrogram where we're actually just drawing Venn diagrams of these hashtags and seeing how much they coincide together. Now you can start to see how they get packaged together. In fact, this little branch is our QAnon conspiracy theory, where we can start to see these concepts packaging together. But we can see here, bail denied and lock them up occur together, and some other things that I don't necessarily need to read out loud. But anything, also this gets packaged with hashtag #BeBest, and some other sort of reused slogans. So this is all automatically generated when we export those tweets out of there. We can get this analysis pretty quick. Another thing we might do is we can actually ask NVivo to run through and do automated sentiment analysis. And so every tweet gets put into a category of from very positive, somewhat positive, to somewhat negative, to very negative. And we might put these together and look at the difference between the sentiment present in R. Kelly and the sentiment present in Epstein. Yeah, of course we would look at both of these and expect the majority to be in very negatives, but then let's figure out this story about these sort of moderately positive tweets that show up for R. Kelly compared to the share that show up for Epstein, and think through sort of the construction of how that type of discourse would occur. If we start to, it'll run through and look for some auto-coded themes. This is just pure linguistic analysis based off of some lexicons of what go together, right? If we were to go through this, I might have a conversation about why in R. Kelly's tweets we have the construct of predator showing up, but in Epstein's we don't. Right? And maybe I think there are some racial overtones to that. So these are how I might use some sort of discussions to flow out of these conversations in my class. We can also, this is a really good example to talk about algorithmic bias. This is a concept that comes up a lot lately, and I think this is really the easiest way to get students to wrap their heads around it. That the idea of just because something is data-driven doesn't mean it's free of bias, because this is a really good example. This is searching within those Epstein tweets. We were looking, my colleague and I, for sort of racialized statements. So we searched for the terms black or African, and then used NVivo's generalization algorithm to say, give me also synonyms and generalizations of those terms. NVivo starts to return things. Again, black or African, we get generalizations of dirty, evil, boy, illegal, and then we think through where those come from and how this actually, this supposedly unbiased algorithm can start to give us results like this. And how these socially constructed terms can, this is something that we can talk days about in really abstract things. We can talk about how, subsidies-backed or securities-backed mortgages were racially biased in the algorithms that computed that. But this is something they can wrap their heads around really quickly and a lot faster than securities-backed mortgage algorithms. And we can talk about, the racist roots of things like terms like black magic or black market, that's probably where we get evil and the illegal hits. But it's really tough to explain to me how you're going to do a generalization of black or African and get the hit boy. right? There's something else going on there in the lexicon of how this algorithm is set up. And this provides some examples of some really good discussions about the importance of qualitative looks at sort of quantitative data. And so there's countless ways that we can go through.
And that comes back to what I showed with the meltwater data as far as the sentiment and share of voice. Especially with the sentiment, there is a bias. It looks for words that we would consider, even you hear death or bad, not healthy. All of those things we would say are negative, but I always joke around and say when you hear Michael Jackson's song Bad, sure, maybe people equate Michael Jackson to not being positive, but the song isn't bad as far as negative. It's the name of the song, but it would be put in the negative category. So why is that? Well, it's because the algorithm is taught, it doesn't have that human characteristic to understand inflection or even what we're actually meaning. It just takes the words on a tweet or post on Instagram, Facebook, etc., or a blog and says, okay, that's negative. And that's why it's necessary for us to kind of go deeper and have that analysis to say, if we're not looking at these tweets or posts critically, then we're not getting the real data out of this.
Yeah, I think all of this is sort of not necessarily in and of itself a lesson that we would do, but it's a vehicle to have sort of discussions that are data backed and data driven and are sort of also not just these canned data sets. They're actually real things. You can say, we pulled these tweets, right? You can go and you can find them on Twitter. And so this is just some ways that you might think of incorporating some of this. That's what we've prepared, but we wanted to make sure that we left, I think we've got a little under 15 minutes left, for some time for questions or we can brainstorm through how you might use some of these in your classes. So I'd like to just open it up.
Yeah.
This was an example specifically because we were looking at when a match or a mismatch between the race of the perpetrator and the race of the victim, specifically, it was in that context. And so we were looking at specifically the R. Kelly case because he was targeting young black women. So that was another dimension of this. But I mean, you're right that when we start to look at how we can chop this data up, we can chop it in any number of different dimensions. Now, the thing we didn't talk about here, and a part of this that I also think is quite useful, is to use this as a data source to engage in a discussion of qualitative coding, right? And hand coding as we go through and we start to make distinctions about this. And maybe I've got a class of 30 students, and so I give everybody 200 tweets that we pulled on this. And I start to say, maybe I don't give any directions, but we put them in groups, and I start to say, read through this with your group, and start to subdivide out the major populations that you see in here. And you see how the students start to identify these across different lines. Then maybe you start to give some direction. You say, start to look for class-based distinctions, or maybe regional distinctions, or maybe different sort of, however you might think that there are cleavages within these communities that are useful for analytic purposes. And then you start to get in a really nice discussion with your students about how we operationalize those things, how we see indicators of them, how we might define these bounds on these populations in different ways. And I think that is a really nice way to talk about socially constructed groups with students. I think that's a good frame for a lesson around that in practice.
Can I follow up on that, because I'm not a tweeter, so I do not. I don't know what you need to provide when you open an account. So I understand. I think some of your data was showing what region of the country the tweet's coming from.
Yeah.
What type of information do you have about the individual that provided the tweet that you could potentially carve the data up by?
Yeah, let me actually just really quickly get NVivo up while we're talking. Do you want to, in the background in Meltwater?
Sure.
What do you get with that?
Meltwater, unless on Twitter that you've allowed yourself to be sort of geolocated, it won't come up where you were tweeting from. So unless when you're tweeting, whether it's from the desktop or from the phone, you can allow yourself to be sort of placed somewhere. If you're on campus, it may show Mary Graydon Center, but you're actually in SIS or something along those lines. It'll pop up, but that would be in Washington, D.C. So if I'm looking on a heat map and I see a number of tweets are coming from Washington, D.C., I can then click on that and look to see, okay, where was it in D.C.? It's not to do it in a way that would say, all right, I'm going to go stop in and find them. It's more of, there's a number of people in D.C. that feel strongly about this topic. Let's compare it to maybe Trenton, New Jersey, and see that if with the same population as far as numbers, whether we're getting the same sort of data.
Yeah, and in fact, location data is something with Twitter that I have serious qualms about. Because if you do allow your location to be shared when you tweet, then what you will actually get. So this is in vivo, and this is a data set of tweets that comes loaded as that you can play around with. So this is defined as tweets coming out of this little coastal North Carolina community they did a study in. And so the way they define this is these are tweets that have hashtag Carteret County in them. So that's what this search was. Every row in this data set is a tweet, and so you can get a bunch of things. And one of the things that you'll see, they have location data. Okay, so what is that based off of? One, if you have your precise geolocation tab turned on, you will get longitude and latitude coordinates. If you don't have that turned on, but in your bio you list a location, it will default to that location. Now, I can list any location in my bio. The example I always give is the amount of tweets coming out of Wakanda a year ago with the launch of the Black Panther film, right? So that's not actually necessarily reliable location data, just like I could list Trenton if I was here and had my location turned off. That's not to say that that's not a useful signal that somebody is presenting as from a particular place or not, but I would just take it with a grain of salt and more as a, not necessarily a physical location indicator.
You may have not been. I was.
Okay, yeah. So live tweeting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I know T'Challa really well.
On race, sex, socioeconomic status,
So,
any of that stuff.
No. Well, what we get with every tweet that we export are unique IDs that can tie it back in Twitter, the username of who tweeted it. These are live links, so if we click on that, it'll take us into their profile. Here's the individual text of the tweet, the time and date that it was tweeted at. You can see the time if I expanded that. Whether it was a tweet or a retweet, a list of the users that retweeted it, the number of retweets that it got, hashtags that were used in the tweet get pulled out to a separate variable. These are the users that were mentioned within it. And then everything from here on out is meta information pulled from their Twitter profile. So the name, the location that they list, if they list a website, anything they have in a bio, the number of tweets, followers, the number they're following, on and on. So we have that kind of information. There was some research that's been done suggesting we could actually search within bios for indicators of different memberships in different groups, whether that is a racial group or things, but those are people that are disclosing this membership in this organization, in this community. One of the things that you'll see on Twitter a lot is that you may have a specific population or a specific group on Twitter that is engaging in a sustained conversation, and they indicate that membership by having a hashtag or a certain thing in their bio. Right? So we may look for people that are self-identifying across that, but it's not like we're going to get necessarily demographic information about these people. We may have to go to their bios and make some judgment calls. And again, all of this virtually, we have to make judgment calls about how they are presenting, not necessarily who they are. Yeah.
Now, from the sake, if you were using Facebook, if you were running a page for the university, or if SIS has their own specific Facebook page, you can go into the data there and see race, male, female, identifying other, etc., age range, where they are particularly, because Facebook gives you that data. Now, you can't get that from your own personal page, but if you are one of the administrators on an account, like a brand account, or like a Facebook, not a personal page, but a brand page, like an American University SIS. You can actually go in and it'll show you the data, because that's how Facebook, or that's how community managers will end up doing targeted ads.
Yeah.
They may not want to target adults between the ages of 35 and 50, but they do want to target adults or young adults between the ages of 18 and 26. So I want to see, where do you want? Oh, they're from Wilmington, Delaware. Okay, I want to see where. That's the sort of thing. It's a lot different than this. It's not like in Vivo or Meltwater. It comes right from Facebook Insights. So that's something where you're not going to necessarily get that on some of the monitoring platforms we've talked about. It's something that Facebook actually frankly does pretty well, even though people do have some issues with Facebook. One of the things that I've found very helpful, especially in my both in and out of the classroom, is looking at that data to actually break down how I can target ads and how I can figure out where my fans or followers are from, so I can figure out, hey, do we need to do anything targeted to those people to get more visitors, to get more admissions applications from that area.
Yeah. And in fact, on individual audience pages on your Twitter profile, if you go on the back end, you can actually see your own audience about what other interests of people that follow you, what are other things that they tweet about, and things like that. I should also say that in Vivo works best pulling data from Twitter, but it will also, two other places, the same in Capture browser plugin works, is to pull organizational pages off of Facebook. We don't get that demographic information in the back, but we can pull sort of the timeline. If we went to American University's Facebook page, we could pull all the posts that were made on that wall. The other place it works is on YouTube. We can extract YouTube videos, but we can also extract the comment sections under them. Now, these are of varying levels of discourse, let's say politely, but there are also certain communities where there are real conversations happening there. And I know in our Critical Race and Gender Studies program, we have a faculty member there that is looking at the discourse that occurs in comment sections of certain. DC Heat is a show that is about the sort of black lesbian population in DC, and the comments under there are quite substantive. Any other questions? Maybe 2 more minutes. Or now. All right. Well, thanks for coming today. I appreciate it. And I think where students have arrived, so it's close enough that I can say this without groans, but have a great semester, everybody. And we're around if you want to chat with us or set up a time to talk later. So thanks for coming.
Always happy to continue the conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.